Okay, can you hear me now? Um, Your link has no feed for me. Okay. Yeah, I'm trying to understand why as well. I think it just came on. I can still hear myself. I think it just came on. I can still hear myself. Okay, I'm gonna start. I'll go as long as I can, hearing myself in the background, and we can, or probably just try and ignore whatever is happening in the back. But all right, okay, so hopefully this is working now. We're talking about implications of economic abuse on gender-based violence. And when we talk about domestic violence, we don't usually think about financial abuse and the implications that it has on women, those who are being affected by it. My name is Rupande Mehta. I'm the founder of SAR Foundation, and it was launched on November 25, 2016. We're fighting violence against women and girls. This issue is very personal for me because I am a survivor of childhood sexual abuse, family abuse, and dating violence for about a period of 16 years. So to work into SAR, okay, Elsa says there's not an echo anymore, but I'm hearing myself in the background, which is kind of driving me crazy at this point, but we'll try and ignore it as much as I can. Okay, Elsa says there's not an echo anymore, but I'm hearing myself in the background, which is kind of driving me crazy at this point, but we'll try and ignore it as much as I can. So SAR implements its mission in 4 ways. We're providing, well, actually 5 ways. We're providing domestic violence services to people who need it, involving more men into the movement, children, corporations, and narrating stories of trailblazers who have survived violence or work in the domain of violence against women. Corporations and narrating stories of trailblazers who have survived violence or work in the domain. Violence against women is everywhere. About 1 in 3 women have experienced physical sexual violence at some point in their lives. And about 2 in 3 victims of intimate partner or family-related homicides are women. So you can see that this is a pervasive issue, not just in certain countries, but throughout the world. Obviously, you can see, looking at this figure and looking at this graphic, Asia has a big proportion, about 66 to 67%, which is a very wide range. But what really gets to me in this picture is that less than 40% of women who've experienced some sort of violence have sought help of any sort, which is a staggering number. When you think of 1 in 3, when I'm in a room, I kind of try and look at how many women are in the room. And most cases, there is at least 3 or more. And it is simply, in my mind, for me, it's a question of how many women in here have suffered through violence, how many have sought help for it. Many times I'm in a room where the statistic is more than 1 in 3 women. It's probably 2 in 3 or 3 in 3 women who have experienced violence. So violence is a big problem against women. And to correlate that with the number like less than 40% who have sought help just shows us the challenge that we are up against and the amount of work that we have to do to keep going in this field. So what is domestic violence? Domestic violence is simply about power and control. It's not about physical abuse. It's not about sexual abuse. It's not about isolation. All of these things that you see on this graph, it really is not about any of those things. It manifests itself in all of these things. But to underline a basic cause for domestic violence, it is power and control. So it is defined as a pattern of abusive behavior in any relationship. It could be spouses, it could be parents and child, it could be dating relationships, it could be brother and sister. There's a lot of sibling violence as well, where one partner uses power and control over another intimate partner. They try to maintain that power and control. And it can manifest itself again in all of these different ways that the power and control wheel that the Duluth model has so well. Sorry, I got distracted because somebody said they cannot see the PowerPoint. Let me just make sure that people can. Sorry, I got distracted because somebody said they cannot see the PowerPoint. Let me just make sure that people can. Okay, there we go. It should be okay now. Give it a second and it should work. Okay, there we go. It should be okay now. Give it a second. It should work. All right, so coming back to the Duluth model. So the Duluth model identified ways in which this power and control is manifested. And you can see in this wheel that there are different ways. One is coercion and threats, which is making people do things that they don't want to do, or threatening them, saying, if you don't do this, I'm going to do this. If you don't have sex with me, I'm going to leave you. If you don't, sometimes it manifests itself in different ways. I've heard clients tell me, he tells me to deal in drugs, otherwise I'm going to leave, he's going to leave me. And the dependence there is so strong because of the abuse, that women, I say women because, we saw in the earlier graphic, the high prevalence of violence against women, are compelled to, go ahead and carry out those tasks that even may be illegal at times. Intimidation is by using looks, or maybe, sometimes they show a gun that makes women feel like, I don't know what he's going to do to me. I rather do everything he says. Emotional abuse, which is a very, very common form of abuse, but I feel the least understood, which is putting somebody down, calling them names, calling them crazy, playing mind games with them, making them feel guilty for actions. Isolation is not allowing women to really have a life. So telling them who to talk to, when to go out, who to go out with, using jealousy to justify actions. I had a client once who told me that my husband doesn't let me go out because he says, I'm going to be so lonely when you go out. Well, that kind of makes like throwing that pity party in those words is also a way of isolating you from your friends, because eventually she lost contact with all her friends. Minimizing, denying, and blaming the woman for the abuse. So saying basically, you're not a good wife. If you did better, the house is so messy. If you kept it a bit clean, I wouldn't have to abuse you. Or saying that, the abuse didn't happen. So outright denying the abuse. Like it's all in your head. I didn't do that. I once had a client where the guy stabbed her with a knife and convinced her that she fell on the knife and not that he stabbed her. So when the police came, she said, oh, I fell on the knife. I really didn't. He didn't really do anything to me. And then blaming the woman for the abuse by saying, you are really responsible, which I kind of touched on a little bit earlier. Using children, again, you're not a good mother, you should do a better job. Economic abuse, which is the focus of our presentation, so I'll get to that in a minute. And using male privilege. It's I'm the man, you're the woman, we're in a traditional marriage, you have to do what I ask you to do. So that brings us to our first discussion question, and we're going to try and make this work as best as we can. Bear with me while we figure out the kinks in the system as well. So what do you think is economic abuse? You can use the chat box and try and tell me what you think. But let's go ahead and see what you say. But let's go ahead and see what you say. Okay, the first answer we have is deprivation of money. Yeah. I'm going to try and share the screen again with you. Okay, the first answer we have is deprivation of money. Yeah. I'm going to try and share the screen again with you. Use of economic dependency as a threat. Okay, yes. Use of controlling women through by limiting her access to money, not allowing access to economic resources. Yeah, all of those, yes. Controlling women through by limiting her access to money, not allowing access to economic resources. Yeah, all of those, yes. Anything else before I move on? Limiting her access to her own money. Very good point, Manmeet. Very, very good point. Anything else before I move on? Limiting her access to her own money. Very good point, Manmeet. Very, very good point. And not allowing any financial independence or independent decision-making with regards to finances. Another very good point. And not allowing any financial independence or independent decision-making with regards to finances. Another very good point. Okay, so let's move on. Economic abuse is another way to control a person. So it's all of those things that we just talked about. No money, unpaid bills. There might be, you might be on an allowance. You may not have access to your own money. You may have to surrender your paycheck. And not being able to really use the money the way you want to use the money. And the reason given for economic abuse might be varied. Oh, you're so busy in the house, let me take this off of your chest. Or you know what, I don't really think you're capable of handling finances. Or you know what, I'm the man, I should control the money. Let me help you with the money. Let me make sure all the bills are paid. Let me make sure all the expenses are paid. I think I can do a better job at this than you can. And that also leads to another form of emotional abuse, right? If you think about it, if somebody comes up to you and tells you, you know what, I think you're too stupid to handle finances, that's not particularly empowering and making you feel all, you know, warm and fuzzy inside. So that's, you know, economic abuse can also lead to other forms of abuse. It can also manifest itself in other ways. But the basic way is really not allowing you any access to cash. So this is a very big fact. 74%. So the National Domestic Violence Hotline is a big resource in the United States. And, you know, as you can imagine, it's a hotline. People call in whenever they are in a domestic violent relationship and they need help and resources. And they found through a survey in 2012 that 74% of survivors stayed in an abusive with an abusive partner because of money, because of financial concerns. Let that sink in for a second. That is more than 2/3 of the women who were in a violent relationship, who were probably afraid for themselves, had safety concerns, but they decided to stay with that person because they did not have anywhere to go. They did not have any other resources, and they did not have any money. It's almost humbling to understand and realize that this is the extent of violence that women face and shows itself in these ways that we possibly cannot even comprehend on a day-to-day basis. All right. So economic abuse, as you know, all of you have excellent, very, very well already outlined. It centers around the financial aspect of the relationship. The definition of economic abuse is an abuser takes control of limited access to shared or individual assets. It prevents the person who is being abused from either going out there and making a living, or it also prevents the person from getting access to the family resources. So in economic abuse, the abuser separates the victim from their own resources. So it could be their own money. I have somebody who has, this is very common in the Indian culture, that when you get married, the woman comes in with her share of gold from her parents, and her abuser took away all the gold, put it in a safe, took the key with him, and basically every time she needs access to these things, she has to go to him and say, I need to go to the bank to get X, Y, and Z for a particular wedding that I have to attend. So that is a forced dependency on the abuser. Right? Other ways it can be like, he prevents you from getting a job or keeping a job, because a lot of times what they do is, again, it comes back to the isolation. They keep calling you. They want to try and see, how are you doing? What time will you be home? Are you going to pick up the kids? Are you going to do this? Are you going to do that? To getting to a point where it might interfere with your work so much that you say, you know what, this is not worth it. And you walk away. Making her ask for money. So sometimes they put you on an allowance. They could say, you know what, I'm going to give you X amount of the money. Surrender all your paycheck to me. I'm going to give you X amount of money every month. I'm not letting you know anything about access where the money is, which is what I mentioned earlier about the safe and so forth. And taking away all your money. So if you're earning, take away all the money and put you in an allowance. Reminds me of a situation once. I heard about this from somebody who was working in this field. There was a lady, there's a lady at a Fortune 500 company. And you can imagine how much money she's making at a senior level position, a VP position. She was on an allowance from her husband. He put her on an allowance. We don't think about these things on a day-to-day basis. We don't look next to us and think about, oh, is this woman going through economic abuse? Does she have the money? Does she not have the money? But economic abuse is very widespread. And we saw earlier that 74% decided to stay in their relationships because they were concerned about their financial future. So what does economic abuse look like? Just kind of putting all your responses together, forbidding the victim to work, sabotaging work, controlling how the money is being spent, not allowing access to bank accounts, giving allowances. I'm not going to go through all of these. I'm happy to send you guys the PowerPoint if you want to look at it later. But basically, again, controlling access to money, controlling access to resources. And because those two things are controlled, you can only imagine how much you can do on your own. When we step out of our homes, the first thing you need is cash. You need to take a cab. You need to take a rickshaw. You want to go window shopping. Maybe you like something. Maybe you want to buy something. All of this needs money. To think about it, try to take away your wallet from yourself one day and go out of the house and see how long you last. It would be a very, very good example of trying to put yourself in a victim's shoes to understand the extent that economic abuse can have on somebody. All right, so this brings us to our first case study. I'm going to try and enlarge the screen so everybody can see. I'll give you about a few minutes and go through it. And then we have some questions that we'll discuss. So about 5 minutes, maybe less than 5 minutes, because we already started pretty late. So go through it, start reading it, and then we'll have some questions afterwards. Oh, the case study disappeared. Okay. We'll bring back the case study then. No, it's water. I think if I go in presentation mode, oh, that's a good idea, Vandita. Yeah, let me do that. Let me copy and paste it in the chat as well. Okay, where is our stream? There we go. Stream. There we go. I lost feed now. Okay. Why? That's the thing that's being shared right now. That's the thing that's being shared right now. The chat is not allowing me to. You know what? I'll try that for the next one. I think we can move on. Let's see. Did everybody at least get a chance to see it, or is it too small? You know what? I'll try that for the next one. I'll give an overview so people can at least, for those who haven't been able to read it or what. So, okay, it's about Shalini. She lives in Mumbai. She's been married to her husband for 16 years now, has a 15-year-old daughter. So she had the child right after she got married. She married him 3 months before her 12th standard exam. After the wedding, husband discouraged her to appear for the exam, saying she was married and there's no need for an education, really. Within the first 6 months, she was pregnant. She conceives a daughter, and Shalini is a stay-at-home mom, during which her husband told her she didn't need to concern herself with the family finances, only take care of their daughter. She was overworked, so she said, oh, this is great, let him take care of everything. And then during that time, he also took away her jewelry on the pretext of keeping it safe, took the passport, the ration card, and all the documents for safekeeping, quote unquote. Okay. Then the daughter turns 4, husband says, start working. She says, I don't want to work, I want to be at home. The problem of choice. He's not really giving her a choice. He starts acting weird. Every night there is anal rape. And he says, if you have sex with me, then I'll give over the finances to you. So there is a cycle now that is developing. Eventually, Shalini finds a job, fast forward to a few years, and she works there for the next 7 years in less than desirable conditions. Every month, she has to surrender her paycheck to the husband. He's still taking care of the family finances, okay? Shalini has no bank account of her own, no idea how much money the family owns and how the bills are being paid. So one day she comes home, the family is in darkness. She's trying to figure out what's going on. They inform and calls the power service. They inform her bills were unpaid for the last 6 months. When she confronts her husband, he tells her they've fallen on hard times and several bills are unpaid. So after much wrangling, family intervention, and all of that, it's discovered that the husband has gambled away all the money and they're completely broke. So that's the case study. We're going to follow up with some questions, and which I can print them in the chat. So Okay. I see that you're seeing me again, so let me change that. So those are the first two questions. What are some of the signs the husband was depicting power and control? That's the first question. The second question is, what are some of the signs the husband was economically abusive? So remember the power and control wheel that I showed you earlier. Use that to answer this question, the first question. Third question is, did Shalini do anything to exacerbate her husband's behavior? If so, what was that? And what are the signs that the economic abuse got worse? Okay, so the Red Elephant Foundation says he took away all her jewelry and he didn't give her access to it. Okay, so that's economic abuse. When the daughter turned 4, he forced her to work, right? Anything else? He asked her for all of her paychecks. Yes. Yes, he did do that, didn't he? I'll go back to the case study. What about discouraging her to appear for her exams? Do you think there was power and control there? What about discouraging her to appear for her exams? Do you think there was power and control there? Anal rape was a sign of when it got worse. Yes, anal rape was a sign of it getting worse. Forcing her to work as well is another sign, right? Because her environment was less than desirable. There was worker exploitation, unwanted advances from her boss, low wages. And he didn't care when she told him that. And she had no bank account of her own. She had no idea how much money the family really owned and how the bills were being paid. Remember, she's very young. She's married this guy right off her 12th standard. So, you know, she's not aware of the world as much as we are in this day and age. Somebody who is a graduate, their level of thinking is very different from somebody who's in 12th grade. She doesn't have a lot of idea about how the world operates, and he has kept her isolated, hasn't he? He has made sure that she doesn't understand the world very well. He has made sure that he thinks this is normal, not having a bank account, having to work, having to have a daughter right off the bat, right after getting married, not being concerned with family finances and just taking care of the daughter. All of these are signs of abuse. Ensure she's dependent on him by stopping her completing her studies. Yes, absolutely. She was also working in a toxic environment, deeply controlling. Nothing that Shalini did exacerbated her husband's behavior. This was him throughout. Absolutely. That's the key here. She wasn't doing anything to exacerbate her husband's behavior. Victim blaming is very easy, but it is something that is very wrong. It is never the victim's fault. Good, very good answers. All right, so let's move on. So my next question is, economic abuse occurs only in the lower strata of society. Yes or no? Economic abuse occurs only in the lower strata of society. Yes or no? Okay, no. No. What a nasty piece of work this husband of hers. Yes. Yes, unfortunately, this is fact, not fiction. Yes, unfortunately, this is fact, not fiction. All right, so we have about 12 minutes or so. I want to try and wind down as much as possible, so I'll move a little bit quicker. And the answer is no. Economic abuse occurs in all strata of society. Sometimes I've also seen that the people who are very well off are more afraid to leave because they're more dependent on what they have to lose, and they have a lot more to lose than people who don't have that much access to resources. So there's another case study here, but I'm gonna pass on that for now, just so that we can make sure that the next presentation is on time. All right, so this is a very staggering statistic here, between 94 to 99%. So, which means really everybody who has suffered through domestic violence have also experienced economic abuse. And how do you break down the costs of violence against women? So on an annual basis, only in the US, it costs us about $4.9 billion. But this does not take into account the indirect costs of violence against women. So taking into account estimates of cost of pain, things that are not really measurable, the intangible costs. The tangible costs are very easy to understand. It's direct medical costs, lost productivity, lost earnings over a lifetime. But the suffering, the emotional abuse, the quality of life, the suffering and the stunted quality of life, all of that together can cost up to $500 billion, which is, a lot of money. So economic abuse is not just harmful to the person on whom it is happening. It is actually very, very harmful for the country, the nation, and the global economy as a whole. It costs us a lot of money. The economic aspects of abuse are centered around economic insecurity, economic impact of violence, and economic abuse. We talked about economic abuse. We talked about economic insecurity as well. People are afraid to leave because they're dependent on the financial resources. And what is the impact of economic violence, which we will talk about in a second. So there are three different impacts: on self, on security, and the overall impact. I'll go through the overall impact. So there is no financial security or independence, clearly. You're losing earnings. There's loss of productivity. Forcing pregnancy. Remember that Shalini case study, how he made her pregnant in the first 6 months of being married? That is a possibility, because that when a woman has a child, the overall impact to go work and find jobs is lessened, especially if there is not enough childcare support around. Eviction is another possibility. If you don't have enough money, you know how he lost all the money. He gambled everything away. The lights were out in the house. There could be other costs incurred, damaged property. He got angry. He threw things around. He broke a bunch of stuff. He smashed the TV. He broke the lights. He made a mess in the house, broke furniture, all of that, and destroyed credit. Sometimes they steal your credit information, they steal the credit cards, go out there, gamble away, use the money for everything else but what it's supposed to be used for. All right, so the important thing to remember here is domestic violence is a learned pattern of behavior. And there could be a lot of other compounding factors of economic abuse that can exacerbate domestic violence. Some of them, they're all listed here. Lack of education, disability, strictly defined gender roles. I'm the man, you're the woman, you're going to listen to everything I say. Immigrant status is a big one in the US as well, because when you are in a foreign country, you don't have the proper paperwork, or you may have the proper paperwork, but you still can't go out there and earn because of your visa restrictions. You're even more dependent, and that creates a bigger possibility of domestic violence. I'm going through these slides because I at least want to give you guys a couple of minutes if there is any questions. The solutions for tackling domestic violence, they have to be implemented from 3 angles, basically. You have to talk about solutions from a survivor perspective, always. They have to be system focused, because there's a lot of holes in the system that do not allow the survivor to get access to resources, information, and help. And it's not very survivor friendly. So you have to make sure that the system works in tandem to make sure that the abuser is held accountable, but at the same time, it is also friendly to the survivor. So the survivor-focused strategies would be to educate them about their rights and options, overcoming cultural fears. So, talking to the police is an example. Or I have had clients from Russia who they see the police and they run the other way. Well, guess why? In their country, police is not a force to be trusted. The police works against you. So making sure that there is that, in your part of the country, wherever you're from, to make sure that they are not afraid of, reporting abuse, and also understanding that reporting abuse does not equate to destroying the family. You reporting abuse does not destroy the family. Him choosing to abuse destroys the family. And also helping survivors with the process once they are in the system, because it's a very complicated system. It is extremely overwhelming, and it's very difficult for people to navigate through it. The system has to work better and advocate to the justice system. There has to be a better interaction between survivor and system. You also have to educate the police on cultural nuances, but also on other nuances about domestic violence. And the abuser, hold them accountable for their actions. Talk to them about toxic masculinity, about patriarchy, about what to do when there is an issue of rejection. How do you deal with rejection? These are very important conversations that we need to have, but not in a way that they feel like they are being attacked. Because when you attack somebody, they go on the defensive. It is important to engage in a bilateral conversation. All right, so what to do if you suspect economic abuse? Make sure that your records are in a safe location. Leave copies. Compile an emergency evacuation box. Keep copies of car and house keys, an extra copy. Internet is a great source of information. And be cautious about giving out personal information, so on and so forth. Again, I'll pass this along so you guys can take a look at it. These are some safety planning tips that help people who are in a domestic violence relationship to kind of keep themselves and their children safe. Emergency numbers. The one thing I would always recommend is keep a journal of abusive behavior, if possible with date and time, in a safe place. It may help you with some legal protection down the road, or it may just help create that understanding in your mind that there is a cycle of abuse here. I'm planning to leave my husband. Should I tell him? I'm going to go through this really quickly. The most dangerous time for a survivor of violence is when she or he is planning to leave or has recently left. Why? Remember we talked about domestic violence being about power and control? Now you're telling this guy, I'm gonna leave you. And what is he afraid of? He's afraid of losing his power and control over you. This can make him extremely unstable, violent, dangerous. So he can act out in very unpredictable ways. If you're planning to leave, just leave. Don't tell him that you want to leave. Again, some resources here. In the US and around the world, there's the GBV health map developed by the Red Elephant Foundation, which is just a phenomenal piece of information. You go on there all over the world, you can access pretty much anything that you want in terms of domestic violence. We are around as well if there's anything the SAR Foundation can do. And there's, again, other regions around the world that you can also reach out to. All right, we have about 3 minutes. Any questions? I'm sorry I had to rush through some of this, but there is an upcoming webinar at 12 o'clock. So if you guys can stick around for that, that won't have as many tech issues. And it will be an interesting session. So make sure that you stick around if you have time. Okay, so no questions, I guess. All right, so I give you back your 2 minutes. Thank you again for having me here, Red Elephant Foundation. This was a very good experience, and I'm happy to pass along the presentation. I'll share it with Kirti at Ref, and she can pass it along to whoever wants it. Again, thank you, and enjoy the rest of your day. Oh, wait, we have a question. What is the first thing someone should know when she faces economic abuse? We can't send links. Oh, well, it's economic abuse is a tricky one, actually. But I think the good thing to make sure is I always go back to safety. So if you are suspecting economic abuse, start saving some money, a little bit ends and odds here that you can put your hands on. Start saving that money, start putting it in a locker, or start putting it with somebody that you confide in. So you have an escape route. At all times, think about safety, think about the worst case situation, and try to plan for that situation. Any other questions? All right, well, our time is up. And thank you again, everybody, for being here and having so much patience while I tried to figure this out. I enjoyed the session tremendously. If there are any questions, you can feel free to reach out to me on Twitter and Facebook. Or you can also get my information through Ref. Thank you. Bye-bye. Or you can also get my information through Ref.